Tonight, our journey takes us to the legendary life and conquests of Alexander the Great, the man who sought the very ends of the world. But first, come in from the cold, leave the wind and the shadows outside. You are safe here, in the sanctuary of whispers, where the fire is low and the candlelight flickers against the shelves. I've already found the volume you seek, a heavy tome, bound in ancient sun-warmed leather. Let us open it together to the first page. Your long journey begins now. The night in Pella does not fall with a sudden curtain, but rather it seeps into the limestone cracks of the palace like spilled ink, cold and inevitable. Within the royal chambers the air is thick with the scent of burning olive oil and the faint, sweet trail of lavender drying in bundles from the cedar rafters. It is a heavy atmosphere, one that settles upon the lungs like a soft woolen blanket, inviting the eyes to close and the mind to wander into the labyrinth of history. The flickering flame of a single bronze lamp casts long, dancing shadows against the tapestries, making the woven figures of hunters and lions appear to breathe in the unsteady light. Near the centre of the room, the cradle of the young prince sits, a vessel of polished wood that gleams with a dull inner fire. Beside it, the queen, Olympias, sits as motionless as a statue carved from the very foundations of the earth. Her breath is a rhythmic, silken sound, a quiet shiver that matches the pulse of the sleeping city outside. She leans forward, her shadow engulfing the small form within the cradle, and her voice begins as a mere vibration in the air, a sound so soft it might be mistaken for the wind brushing against the stone window-sill. She speaks of blood that is not merely human, but divine, tracing the lineage of the gods through the veins of the child who rests beneath her watchful gaze. Her whispers are like the rustle of a serpent through dry grass, filled with the promise of greatness and the weight of a destiny that has been written in the stars long before the first stone of Macedonia was ever laid. She tells him of his ancestor, the swift-footed Achilles, whose name is a melody of bronze and salt spray. She speaks of the hero's rage, a fire that burned brighter than the sun, and she promises the sleeping infant that the same fire now smoulders within his own small chest, waiting for the spark that will turn the world to ash. The room is silent, save for the occasional pop of the dying embers in the hearth, and the distant lonely cry of an owl in the palace gardens. Olympias reaches out, her fingers pale and slender, to touch the edge of the cradle, and the sound of her skin against the wood is a dry, rasping whisper that speaks of ancient things. She does not sing lullabies of peace or simple comfort, but instead she chants the names of the fallen at Troy, letting the syllables roll off her tongue like heavy coins falling into a sphincter, deep well. The air around her seems to grow colder, more electric, as if the spirits of the past are gathering in the corners of the room to listen to her declarations. She describes the feel of the Aegean wind against the face of a warrior, the way the sand of the Trojan shore felt between the toes of a king, and the metallic tang of blood that hung in the air like a storm. The child stirs, a tiny hand grasping at the empty air, and she catches it, her palm a warm and protective shield against the darkness. To be a son of Philip is to be a king, but to be a son of Olympias is to be something more, something that the world is not yet prepared to hold. She leans closer still, her lips almost touching the soft temple of her son, and she breathes the secrets of the gods into his ear, her words a hypnotic lullaby of power and sorrow. The scent of her hair, like wild herbs and damp earth, fills the prince's senses, grounding him even as her words lift his spirit toward the heights of Mount Olympus. In this quiet, shaded sanctuary, the future is being forged in the silence of the night, one whispered promise at a time. As the years begin to turn, and the toddler becomes a boy, the palace of Pella transforms from a nursery into a vast, echoing museum of ambition. The boy finds himself drawn away from the brightly lit halls and the laughter of the court, seeking instead the cool, metallic silence of the royal armoury. Entering this space is like stepping into another world, one where the air is sharp with the smell of old bronze, beeswax, and the pungent oil used to keep the rust at bay. The light here is dim, filtered through high, narrow slits in the stone walls, falling in dusty shafts that illuminate the rows of shields and spears, like the ribs of some great prehistoric beast. The boy moves among the relics of his ancestors, his footsteps silent on the packed earth floor, his heart beating with a strange, reverent excitement. He reaches out to touch a breastplate that once belonged to a king of old, and the metal is shockingly cold beneath his fingertips, a frozen memory of 1,000 battles. He can feel the faint indentations of ancient blows, the scars of swords and arrows that tell a story of survival and strength. The smell of the bronze is metallic and cloying, a scent that seems to coat the back of his throat and fill his mind with visions of golden light and the thunder of galloping hooves. Here, in the presence of these silent sentinels, the boy does not feel small or insignificant, but rather he feels a resonance, a deep and echoing chord that connects his soul to the metal itself. He spends hours in this dim sanctuary, his fingers tracing the intricate engravings of griffins and lions that decorate the greaves and helmets. The texture of the etched metal is rough and uneven, a tactile language that speaks of the craftsman's hands and the warrior's spirit. He imagines the weight of the helmet upon his own brow, the way the world would look through the narrow eye slits, focused and sharp. He dreams of the sound of 1,000 shields clashing together, a rhythmic, deafening music that would drown out the voice of doubt and fear. In these moments, the ghost of Achilles is not a distant myth, but a living presence that stands just behind him, a shadow that grows taller and broader with every passing day. The boy can almost hear the hum of a bowstring and the whistle of a spear cutting through the humid air. The armory becomes his classroom, a place where he learns the geometry of war and the poetry of the blade. He breathes in the dust and the oil, letting it settle into his very bones, until the distinction between the boy and the hero begins to blur. He is no longer just a prince of Macedonia, but a vessel filled with the spirits of the past, his mind a theatre of ancient triumphs and tragedies. The cold bronze is his teacher, its unyielding surface a reminder that greatness is not given, but forged in the fire, of discipline and the silence of preparation. When the first grey light of dawn begins to bleed across the horizon, the boy often finds himself wandering alone along the outer walls of the palace, far from the waking servants and the morning preparations of the guard. The air at this hour is crisp and biting, carrying the scent of the pine forests and the damp, sweet smell of the waking earth. The dew clings to the tall grass like a shimmering veil, and the only sound is the rhythmic crunch of his sandals on the gravel path. He walks toward the edge of the plateau, where the land falls away to reveal the vast, rolling plains of Macedonia, stretching out like a sea of green and gold toward the distant mountains. The peaks of the Pierian range rise up in the north, their jagged summits still dusted with the pale remnants of winter snow, glowing like white fire in the early light. The boy stands at the precipice, his cloak fluttering in the cool breeze, and he gazes at those mountains, with a hunger that he cannot yet name. To him, they are not merely stone and ice, but the borders of a world that is waiting to be discovered, a challenge that has been issued by the gods themselves. The silence of the morning is profound, a heavy, expectant stillness that seems to hold its breath as the sun slowly climbs into the sky. He thinks of the stories his mother told him, of the wide world that lies beyond the peaks, of the burning deserts of the south and the endless forests of the east. He feels the loneliness of his position, the solitary path of a boy who is destined to lead, but in this solitude he finds a strange and potent strength. The mountains do not judge him, nor do they demand anything of him. They simply exist as a reminder of the scale of the earth and the brevity of a human life. He watches as the shadows retreat from the valleys, the light revealing the hidden folds of the landscape, the silver threads of rivers winding their way toward the sea. The smell of the mountain air, sharp with the scent of ozone and ancient stone, fills his lungs and clears his head of the whispers of the palace. He imagines himself standing atop the highest peak, looking down upon the world as if it were a map laid out for his pleasure. The wind pulls at his hair, a cold and insistent touch that feels like the hand of a ghost, urging him forward, away from the safety of Pella and into the unknown. He stands there until the sun has fully risen, casting long golden shadows across the land, and in that moment of transition, the boy knows that he will never be content with the life of a quiet king. The shadow of Achilles is no longer behind him, but before him, stretching out toward the horizon, a path of glory and fire that he is born to follow. The transition from the rigid, stone-hewn corridors of the palace in Pella to the verdant, breathing sanctuary of Mieza is not merely a change of location, but a crossing into a different realm of existence. As the young prince and his companions arrive at the grove of Mieza, the air shifts, losing the dry, dusty scent of the city and becoming heavy with the moisture of hidden springs and the intoxicating perfume of wild jasmine. The sound of the horses' hooves on the dry road is suddenly swallowed by the soft, damp carpet of moss and fallen leaves that lines the entrance to the Nymphaeum. Here, the world feels older, more secretive, as if the very trees are holding their breath to listen to the footsteps of the future. The Nymphaeum itself is a place of cool, shadowed limestone, a temple carved not just by the hands of men, but by the persistent, rhythmic patience of water. The sound of the springs is the first thing that greets the ear, a delicate, layered music of trickling streams and heavy, echoing drips that fall into deep, crystalline pools. Each drop creates a ripple that catches the dim light, sending shimmering patterns of gold across the damp stone ceilings. The air inside the temple is cool and tastes of mineral and ancient earth, a sharp contrast to the baking heat of the Macedonian sun. To step into this space is to feel the weight of the crown lift, replaced by a quiet, expectant stillness that hums in the bones. The boy moves through the temple, his hand brushing against the rough, cold surface of the walls where the moss grows in thick, velvet patches. The texture is soft and yielding, a living blanket that smells of deep forests and forgotten time. In the corners of the sanctuary the shadows are deep and inviting, smelling of damp incense and the faint, sweet rot of fallen petals. The whispers of the water are hypnotic, a constant low-frequency vibration that seems to align the heartbeat with the pulse of the earth. Here, the gods do not feel like distant, vengeful figures of myth, but like intimate companions hiding just behind the next pillar or beneath the surface of the dark water. The silence of Mieza is not an absence of sound, but a symphony of small, delicate noises, the rustle of a bird's wing in the rafters, the distant hum of a bee, and the slow, rhythmic breath of the students who have come here to learn. The transition is complete. The prince has left behind the world of steel and iron for a world of spirit and thought, a place where the mind is allowed to expand like the rings on the surface of the spring. Under the sprawling canopy of the ancient plane trees, the lessons of Aristotle begin, not with the dry recitation of facts, but with the careful, reverent observation of the living world. The master himself is a figure of quiet intensity, his voice a low, steady murmur that carries the weight of 1,000 scrolls and a lifetime of questioning. When he speaks, the sound is like the rustle of dry parchment, a texture that is both scholarly and earthy. They sit in the open air, the sun filtered through the vast serrated leaves of the trees, creating a mosaic of light and shadow upon the ground. Aristotle does not. teach from a throne, but from the earth itself, often kneeling to point out the intricate branching veins of a leaf, or the way a colony of ants navigates the rugged terrain of a tree root. The smell of the classroom is the smell of the world, the pungent scent of crushed herbs, the resinous tang of pine needles, and the clean, sharp aroma of the mountain air. The prince watches the master's hands, which are old and steady, tracing the geometry of a flower's petals, with a tenderness that suggests the divine is found in the smallest of things. As the sun begins to dip lower in the sky, casting long amber fingers across the grove, the lessons turn toward the heavens. Aristotle points toward the emerging stars, his voice dropping into a deep, resonant tone that seems to vibrate in the cool evening air. He speaks of the celestial spheres, the harmony of the cosmos, and the mathematical beauty that governs the movements of the planets. The young Alexander listens with a focus that is almost painful, his eyes fixed on the flickering lights of the night sky, feeling the vastness of the universe pressing down upon him. The air grows colder, smelling of wood smoke from a distant hearth and the metallic scent of the rising moon. The master's words are like seeds planted in the fertile soil of the boy's mind, growing into a forest of questions and ambitions. He is taught that to rule men, one must first understand the nature of the soul, the movement of the tides, and the logic of the stars. The texture of learning here is tactile and raw. It is the feeling of a smooth river stone in the palm, the taste of a wild berry, and the sight of the Milky Way stretching like a bridge across the darkness. In this outdoor cathedral of wisdom, the prince is not just being educated, he is being transformed, his spirit being forged in the quiet fire of philosophy. When the lessons of the morning and the contemplations of the noon are finished, a heavy golden lethargy settles over the grove of Mieza. The afternoon heat becomes a physical presence, a warm weight that presses against the eyelids and slows the pulse to a tranquil crawl. The boys retreat to the deepest shade of the great trees, their bodies finding rest on the soft, sun-warmed earth or against the massive silver-bark trunks of the plane trees. The silence of the afternoon nap is a thick, syrupy thing, broken only by the persistent, rhythmic drone of the cicadas, a sound that seems to vibrate from the very air itself. The smell of the earth is strongest now, a rich, loamy scent that speaks of growth and decay, of the cycle of life that Aristotle has so carefully described. The prince lies on his back, his head resting on a bundle of his own cloak, and watches the slow dance of the leaves above him. The sunlight breaks through the canopy in occasional brilliant sparks, blinding and beautiful, before fading back into the cool green dimness. The texture of the grass against his skin is 1,000 tiny, cool needles, a sensation that grounds him as his mind begins to drift into the realm of dreams. In this state of half-sleep, the boundaries between the self and the environment begin to dissolve. The sound of the nearby stream becomes the sound of his own blood rushing through his veins, and the rustle of the wind in the trees becomes the collective sigh of the earth. The air is still, save for the occasional cooling breath of a breeze that carries the scent of wild rosemary and the dry, sweet smell of hay from the nearby fields. It is a moment of profound peace, a sanctuary within a sanctuary, where the pressures of the future and the echoes of the past are silenced by the overwhelming presence of the now. The boy's breathing becomes deep and regular, a soft, whispered rhythm that matches the swaying of the branches overhead. He is a part of the grove, a part of the silence, a part of the wisdom that resides in the stillness. The heavy, warm scent of the summer afternoon wraps around him like a cocoon, protecting him from the world he will one day have to conquer. In this golden slumber, the lessons of the day are not forgotten, but are woven into the fabric of his soul, becoming a part of his instinct and his character. The shadows of the trees grow long and thin, reaching out to touch him like the fingers of a protective deity, and for a few precious hours the future king of the world is simply a boy, sleeping in the shade of a tree, dreaming of stars and the infinite possibilities of a life yet lived. The silence of the grove is a living thing, a presence that watches over the sleeping students with a quiet, ancient benevolence. Even the birds seem to lower their voices, their occasional chirps becoming soft and melodic, as if they too are under the spell of the afternoon. The prince's hand rests open on the earth, his fingers curled slightly as if he is holding a secret that only the soil knows. The texture of the air is thick and velvety as Suttus, blanket of heat and peace that muffles the distant sounds of the world outside. There is no urgency here, no clocks to mark the passage of time, only the slow movement of the sun and the gradual cooling of the stone. This is the heart of Mieza, the quiet center where the mind and the body find their balance, a place where the seeds of greatness are allowed to rest before they begin their inevitable, violent growth toward the light. The boy stirs slightly in his sleep, a faint smile touching his lips as the scent of the grove fills his senses one last time before the deep, restorative darkness of a true rest takes hold. The sun hangs low over the dusty plains of Macedonia, a heavy, swollen orb of molten copper that seems to bake the very air into a thick, shimmering haze. In the center of the training grounds, a storm of movement and sound erupts, centered around a creature that looks less like a horse and more like a physical manifestation of the earth's untamed fury. The beast is a massive stallion, his coat as black as the depths of a sunless cavern, a hue so deep it seems to absorb the golden light rather than reflect it. They call him Bucephalus, the ox head, a name that carries the weight of his stubborn strength and the broad, powerful brow that he uses to strike at any who dare to approach. The air is filled with the pungent, salty scent of horse sweat and the dry, choking dust kicked up by his frantic hooves. Men, seasoned and scarred by years of war, fall back in a wave of frustration and fear, their leather armor creaking as they retreat from the snapping teeth and the thunderous rhythmic drumming of the stallion's panic. To the observers, it is a display of madness, a wild animal that refuses the yoke of civilization. But to the young prince watching from the periphery, the scene is a puzzle made of light and darkness. He stands perfectly still, his own breath a quiet contrast to the chaos, and he watches the way the horse's eyes roll in, their sockets revealing the whites in a flickering dance of terror. The prince does not see a beast to be broken, he sees a spirit that is being haunted by a ghost. Alexander moves forward with a slow, deliberate grace, his footsteps making almost no sound upon the parched, sun-baked earth. He ignores the warnings of his father and the murmurs of the court, focusing instead on the long, dark shape that stretches out from beneath the stallion's hooves. The shadow is a jagged, shifting thing, a dark predator that seems to leap and twist with every movement the horse makes. The prince realizes that the horse is not fighting the men, but rather he is fleeing from the black spectre that clings to his feet, a phantom that grows longer and more terrifying as the sun begins its final descent. The smell of the air changes as he nears the animal, the metallic tang of the bit and the earthy aroma of the trampled grass becoming sharper, more intimate. He can feel the heat radiating from the stallion's body, a feverish warmth that pulses in time with the animal's frantic heart. Alexander reaches out, not with a rope or a whip, but with a presence that is as steady and cooling as the evening dew. He maneuvers himself with the patience of a hunter, gently taking the stallion's bridle and turning his head toward the blinding golden eye of the sun. In an instant the dark ghost vanishes, swallowed by the brilliance of the light, and the world seems to hold its collective breath. The stallion freezes, his muscles quivering like a bowstring under tension, as the source of his terror is suddenly and miraculously silenced by the young boy who stands at his side. The silence that follows is a thick, velvety thing, a sanctuary of stillness in the middle of the dusty arena. Alexander does not move to mount him immediately, but instead he steps closer, his body brushing against the damp, powerful shoulder of the beast. The texture of the horse's coat is surprisingly soft, beneath the sweat, like a piece of fine, heavy silk that has been dragged through the earth. The prince leans in, his face centimeters away from the stallion's velvet soft ear, and he begins to whisper. The words are not commands, but a low, melodic hum of secrets and promises, a sound that vibrates through the very bone of the animal's skull. He tells the horse of the long roads they will travel together, of the rivers they will cross, and the empires that will fall beneath their combined weight. He speaks of the wind that will soon be their only companion, and of the stars that will guide them when the sun has long since set. The smell of the horse's breath is warm and sweet, like fermented grain and wild clover, and as the prince whispers, he feels the stallion's breathing begin to change. The short, jagged gasps of panic transform into a long, rhythmic sigh, a deep and hollow sound that seems to echo from the very center of the earth. Alexander places a hand upon the horse's neck, feeling the powerful pulse of the jugular vein beneath his palm, a steady driving drumbeat that begins to synchronize with his own. They stand there for an eternity of seconds, two spirits merging into a single, cohesive rhythm of existence. The heat of the sun on the prince's back and the warmth of the horse against his chest create a cocoon of sensory warmth, a private world where the rest of Macedonia ceases to exist. He can feel the tiny tremors in the stallion's skin, as the last remnants of fear are replaced by a cautious, burgeoning trust. The sound of the wind through the nearby olive trees is a soft, shushing noise, like the rustle of 1,000 silk robes, and the air carries the faint, dry scent of cedar and distant wood smoke. The prince feels a sense of profound weightlessness, a clarity of purpose that he has never known before. He knows, with a certainty that defies his youth, that this creature is not a tool of war, but a brother in destiny, a mirror of his own restless and unyielding soul. He waits until the stallion's head drops slightly, a gesture of absolute surrender, before he prepares to take the next step into their shared future. With a movement that is as fluid as running water, the prince pulls himself onto the stallion's back, his legs gripping the powerful ribs with a firm but gentle pressure. There is no saddle to cushion him, only the direct, raw contact with the horse's living heat and the rhythmic shifting of muscle and bone. The stallion does not buck or rear, but instead he stands taller, as if he has finally found the missing piece of his own being. Alexander gives a slight nudge, a silent command conveyed through the weight of his body and the intent of his mind, and the beast begins to move. At first it is a slow, tentative walk, the hooves clicking against the stones with a new, purposeful clarity. But as they reach the edge of the training grounds, where the land opens up into a vast golden expanse of rolling hills and wild grass, the pace begins to quicken. The smell of the open country rushes to meet them, a heady mixture of dry sage, sun-warmed pine, and the cool, damp promise of the approaching night. The prince leans forward, his chest pressed against the horse's mane, and he lets out a low, exhilarating cry that is swallowed by the vastness of the horizon. The transition from a trot to a full gallop is a moment of pure sensory magic, a blurring of the lines between man and beast, earth and sky. The ground beneath them disappears, replaced by a rhythmic, soaring motion that feels like flying. The sound of the hooves is no longer a series of individual strikes, but a continuous, thunderous roll that vibrates through the prince's entire body, settling into his very marrow. The wind tears at his hair and his cloak, a cold, sharp blade that strips away the heat of the day and leaves his skin tingling and alive. The sun is now a sliver of violet and gold on the edge of the world, and they ride straight toward it, a dark silhouette carved against the dying light. The air is thick with the scent of the evening, a cooling, ethereal fragrance that smells of ozone and the deep, silent shadows of the mountains. Alexander feels a sense of unity so profound it is almost painful, a realization that he is no longer limited by his own physical form. He is the speed of the horse, the strength of the muscles, and the relentless drive of the heart that beats between his knees. They fly across the landscape, the world turning into a kaleidoscope of darkening greens and deepening oranges. The textures of the world are reduced to the feel of the wind on his face and the unyielding power of the animal beneath him. There is no fear, only a supreme, hypnotic confidence that they could ride off the edge of the earth and never fall. The silence of the prince's mind is absolute, filled only with the shared heartbeat of the horse and the rushing symphony of the air. He realizes that this is what it means to be a king, not the wearing of a crown or the sitting on a throne, but this absolute mastery of self and nature, this perfect alignment with the forces of the universe. As the last of the sun's light vanishes and the first stars begin to flicker in the darkening vault of the sky, the prince slows the stallion to a halt on the crest of a high hill. Both are covered in a fine sheen of sweat that gleams like liquid silver in the starlight, their breath coming in great billowing clouds of white mist. They look out over the darkened realm of Macedonia, a silent, sleeping giant, and the prince knows that the world will never be the same. The bond has been forged in the sun and the shadow, a covenant of blood and breath that will carry them to the ends of the known world and beyond. The world is a vast grey tapestry as the fleet begins its passage across the Hellespont, a stretch of water that feels less like a sea and more like a threshold between two different lives. The fog is a heavy velvet curtain that has descended during the night, thick enough to muffle the sound of the oars and the rhythmic creaking of the wooden hulls. It is a wet, clinging mist that smells of salt, deep water, and the sharp metallic cold of the early morning. On the deck of the royal galley the air is perfectly still, a pocket of silence in a world of moving ghosts. The young king stands at the prow, his fingers resting lightly upon the damp, salt-crusted railing. The wood is rough and weathered, the grain of the oak standing out in sharp relief beneath his touch, a reminder of the thousands of miles these ships have already traversed. There is no horizon to speak of, only a shifting, ethereal wall of white that seems to breathe with the movement of the tide. Every few seconds the rhythmic splash of the oars hits the water, a heavy, hollow sound that echoes through the fog like a heartbeat, followed by the long, trailing hiss of the wake as it cuts through the surface. It is a hypnotic, repetitive music that lulls the mind into a state of suspended animation, where time loses its meaning and the only reality is the gentle, swaying motion of the deck. The prince can feel the dampness settling into his hair and the fibres of his woolen cloak, a heavy, cold weight that grounds him even as the ship carries him toward the unknown. The scent of the water is overwhelming, a pungent mixture of kelp, brine, and the ancient hidden depths of the sea. It is a smell that speaks of travel and transition, of leaving behind the familiar mountains of Macedonia for the sun-scorched plains of a new world. In the distance the faint low call of a trumpet sounds from another ship, but the sound is swallowed by the fog, rendered thin and ghostly before it can even reach his ears. The world feels small, intimate, and infinitely mysterious. He imagines the spirits of the heroes who crossed this same water 10,000 years ago, there, ships moving through the same mist, their hearts beating with the same restless fire. The silence before dawn is a sacred thing, a pause in the breath of history. It is a moment of pure potential, where the future is still unwritten, and the past is a fading memory in the wake of the fleet. The prince breathes in the cold, wet air, letting it fill his lungs and steady his spirit, knowing that when the fog finally lifts, the world will have changed forever. When the ships finally touch the shore and the mist begins to thin under the first pale rays of the sun, the prince does not head immediately for the encampment. Instead, he walks toward the high, crumbling ruins of Troy, seeking the physical presence of the legends that have haunted his dreams since the cradle. The air here is different from the salt-heavy breath of the sea. It is dry and carries the scent of wild thyme, parched earth, and the faint, sweet aroma of sun-bleached grass. The ruins rise up like the broken teeth of a bathed saw. Giant, ancient limestone blocks that have been weathered by centuries of wind and rain into smooth, undulating shapes. Alexander moves among the stones with a slow, reverent pace, his hand reaching out to touch the surface of a fallen column. The stone is warm from the rising sun, a solid, unyielding heat that feels like the pulse of the earth itself. The texture is gritty and porous, filled with the tiny indentations of time, and as his fingers trace the cracks, he feels a profound connection to the men who once stood behind these walls. This is not a place of death, but a place of eternal resonance, where the echoes of the Great War still vibrate in the very air. He finds a section of the wall that has survived the ages, a massive stretch of fortification that once defied the might of 1,000 ships. The stones are huge, fitted together with a precision that defies the simplicity of the tools that shaped them. He presses his palm flat against the cool, shaded side of a block, and, for a moment, the silence of the ruins is filled with the imagined sound of clashing bronze and the cries of warriors. The wind whistles through the gaps in the masonry, a low mourning sound that carries the dust of the ages. It smells of the desert and the deep forgotten reaches of the east. In this sanctuary of history, the prince is a student once more, learning the lesson that even the greatest empires eventually return to the earth, leaving behind only the stories and the stones. He feels the weight of his own ambition against the backdrop of these ruins, a sharp, piercing realization of the scale of the task he has set for himself. The sun climbs higher, illuminating the pale gold of the hills and the deep blue of the distant sea, and the prince stands amidst the rubble of a fallen age, preparing to build a new one upon the foundation of the old. As the sun reaches its zenith, casting short, intense shadows across the Anatolian soil, Alexander returns to the shore where his Persian army is disembarking. The air is now thick with the sound of thousands of men, the metallic clatter of armor, the braying of pack animals, and the sharp commands of the officers. But as the king approaches the water's edge, a hush begins to spread through the ranks, a wave of silence that follows him as he moves toward the very front of the landing party. In his hand, he carries a spear of polished ash, its head a leaf-shaped blade of brilliant, sharpened bronze that catches the light like a fallen star. The wood of the shaft is smooth and warm, vibrating slightly with the tension of his grip. The weight of the weapon is familiar, a balanced, deadly extension of his own arm. He stands at the prow of a small boat as it nears the beach, his eyes fixed on the untouched sand of the Asian continent. The smell of the land is strong here, a mixture of hot dust, resinous shrubs, and the promise of a vast, unfolding empire. With a sudden, powerful surge of motion, he heaves the spear forward. It cuts through the air with a low, predatory hiss, a sound that seems to slice through the very fabric of the afternoon. The weapon arcs over the shallow water and buries itself deep into the earth of the shore, the bronze head disappearing into the soil with a dull, resonant thud. The vibration of the impact travels back through the air, a final, definitive note that signals the end of the old world. For a long, breathless moment, there is absolute silence. Not a soldier moves, not a bird calls, and even the waves seem to pause in their rhythmic advance. The spear stands upright, a solitary, defiant marker in the sand, its shaft quivering slightly from the force of the throw. It is a symbolic gesture that carries the weight of a divine decree, a claim laid upon a continent by the right of the spear. The silence of this new beginning is a heavy, expectant thing, filled with the potential energy of a coiled spring. The prince steps out of the boat and into the surf, the cold water swirling around his feet, but he does not look down. His gaze is fixed on the horizon, on the endless roads and the unconquered cities that lie waiting for him. The smell of the churned earth where the spear struck is rich and loamy, a scent of birth and conquest. This is the first step into a story that will be told for thousands of years, a moment where the whisper of destiny becomes a deafening roar. The air feels electric, charged with the collective will of an army and the singular vision of a king. As he reaches the shore and places his hand upon the shaft of the spear, the silence finally breaks, replaced by a thunderous, rhythmic chanting of his name that rolls across the water like a storm. But in the center of that noise, the prince remains in a state of quiet, hypnotic focus, his spirit already miles ahead, tracing the paths of his future glory through the dust of Asia. The journey to the heart of Phrygia brings with it a change in the very character of the air, as the fertile greens of the coast give way to the high, arid plateau where the city of Gordium sits like a sentinel of the past. As the young king and his retinue ascend toward the ancient citadel, the sun beats down with a dry, unrelenting heat that smells of baked earth and sun-scorched scrub. But as they pass through the heavy, shadowed portals of the Temple of Zeus, the temperature drops with a suddenness that is almost physical, a cold embrace from a world that has been shielded from the sun for centuries. The interior of the temple is a cavern of silence, where the air is thick with the scent of ancient cedar wood, the metallic tang of old bronze, and the pervasive, heavy smell of dust that has settled over the relics of kings long dead. The light is dim and amber, filtered through small, high openings in the stone walls, catching the dancing motes of dust that float in the air like tiny golden spirits. In the center of the vast, echoing hall sits the chariot of Gordius, the father of Midas, a skeletal structure of weathered oak and leather that seems to pulse with a quiet, dormant energy. The wood is pale and brittle, its surface etched with the fine lines of age, and the leather straps are stiff and grey, holding the chariot to its yoke with the tenacity of a forgotten vow. The king moves closer, his footsteps on the polished stone floor sounding like distant thunder in the profound quiet of the sanctuary. He can feel the chill of the temple seeping through his tunic, a sharp contrast to the warmth of his own skin. The air tastes of dry incense and the cold, mineral breath of the limestone blocks that form the walls. There is a sense of being watched, not by the living, but by the weight of the prophecy itself, a heavy, invisible presence that hangs in the rafters. The chariot is a humble thing for such a grand legend, yet its simplicity only adds to the gravity of the moment. The smell of the ancient wood is deep and earthy, a scent that speaks of the awesome forests of a different age, and the hands of craftsmen who have long since turned to dust. Alexander stands before the yoke, his eyes fixed on the mass of cornel bark that binds the pole to the crossbeam. The silence of the temple is a thick, living thing, broken only by the low, rhythmic hum of the wind outside and the soft, steady sound of his own breathing. He reaches out to touch the wood of the chariot, and it feels shockingly cold and dry, like the bone of a prehistoric beast, a tactile reminder that he is standing at the intersection of history and myth. As the evening begins to draw its long, violet shadows across the citadel, the priests bring forward the oil lamps, placing them in a circle around the ancient chariot. The flickering flames cast a warm, unsteady glow that dances across the walls, making the shadows of the carved columns leap and twist like living giants. The smell of the burning olive oil is sweet and heavy, a familiar, comforting scent that mingles with the cold, dry air of the temple. In this trembling light, the Gordian knot reveals itself in all its maddening complexity. It is not a rope of hemp or flax, but a thick, intricate braiding of cornel bark, the fibres of which have become so tightly intertwined over the centuries that they appear to have grown together into a single, seamless mass. The texture of the bark is rough and ridged, a labyrinth of brown and grey that offers no beginning and no end. There are no loose strands to pull, no visible loops to unravel, only a dense, impenetrable snarl that seems to mock the intellect of any who dare to challenge it. The king leans in closer, the warmth of the oil lamps brushing against his face, and he begins to trace the lines of the knot with his fingers. The bark is hard as stone, a rigid, unyielding surface that feels like the very fabric of destiny itself. He spends hours in this silent contemplation, his mind working through the geometry of the weave. The sound of the flickering lamps is a soft, rhythmic crackle, a tiny fire that pulses in the darkness. He can smell the smoke from the wicks, a thin, acrid trail that rises toward the vaulted ceiling. Every time his fingers follow a strand into the depths of the knot, it vanishes beneath another layer, a puzzle that folds in upon itself with a quiet, stubborn defiance. The men standing in the shadows, his generals and the Phrygian priests, remain perfectly still, their breath a collective shiver in the cold air. They watch the young king, whose face is a mask of intense, hypnotic focus, his brow furrowed in the amber light. He thinks of the prophecy that says, "Whoever unties this knot will be the lord of all Asia," and he feels the immense weight of that promise pressing down upon his shoulders. The knot is a physical manifestation of the obstacles that lie ahead of him, a tangled web of politics, geography, and war that cannot be unravelled by traditional means. The air in the temple seems to grow thicker, more electric, as the frustration of the puzzle meets the clarity of the king's vision. He realizes that to follow the strands is to play by the rules of the past, and he is a man who was born to write the rules of the future. The moment of decision comes not with a shout, but with a profound, terrifying calm. Alexander steps back from the chariot, his movements slow and deliberate, as if he is moving through water. He reaches for the hilt of his sword, and the sound of the leather grip against his palm is a soft, dry rasp that echoes through the silent hall. He draws the blade with a single, fluid motion, and the ring of the steel as it leaves the scabbard is a sharp, silvery note that cuts through the heavy atmosphere like a lightning strike. The sword is a masterpiece of Macedonian craftsmanship, its surface reflecting the orange glow of the lamps in a series of shimmering liquid ripples. The air in the temple feels suddenly charged, the silence becoming so absolute that the heartbeat of the king seems to fill the entire space. He looks at the knot one last time, not as a puzzle to be solved, but as a barrier to be removed. He takes a deep, steadying breath, the scent of the olive oil and the cold stone filling his lungs, and he raises the blade high above his head. The shadows on the wall mimic the gesture, a giant warrior preparing to strike at the heart of the world. The strike is a blur of silver and fire. The sound of the blade meeting the cornel bark is not a dull thud, but a sharp, resonant snap. The sound of 1,000 ancient fibres being severed in a single instant. It is a dry, woody sound that echoes off the limestone walls and rises into the rafters, a definitive end to the mystery of the chariot. The knot, which had held its secrets for centuries, falls away in two neat, symmetrical halves, the severed ends of the bark spilling onto the cold stone floor like the remains of a broken spell. The sudden release of tension in the air is palpable, a rush of energy that makes the flames of the lamps flicker and dance. Alexander stands with the sword still extended, his breathing calm and rhythmic, his eyes fixed on the empty yoke. The silence that follows the strike is deeper than the one that preceded it, a stunned, holy stillness that holds the entire room in its grip. The smell of the freshly cut bark is sharp and green, a scent of life and violence that cuts through the stale dust of the temple. He has not unravelled the knot, he has transcended it. He has demonstrated that the path to greatness is not found in following the intricate, convoluted paths laid down by others, but in the bold, decisive stroke that clears the way. The Phrygian priests look on in a mixture of horror and awe, realizing that they are witnessing the birth of a new kind of power, one that does not wait for permission from the past. The king sheathes his sword, the click of the metal against the scabbard sounding like the closing of a book. The cold of the temple no longer feels oppressive, but rather like a clean, sharp canvas upon which he will paint his own legend. He turns away from the chariot of Gordius, his footsteps now confident and ringing as he walks toward the temple doors. Outside, the stars have begun to emerge in the deep velvet of the Phrygian sky, and the wind carries the scent of the vast, open plains that are now rightfully his. The knot of destiny is no more, and the road to the ends of the earth lies open and clear, waiting for the thunder of his horses and the flash of his spears. The march toward the heart of the Egyptian wasteland is not a journey across land, but a descent into a world made of nothing but light, heat, and the infinite shifting of golden grains. As the army moves deeper into the western desert, the familiar sounds of the world, the clatter of carts, the chatter of camp followers, the ringing of iron, are slowly swallowed by the immense predatory silence of the dunes. The air here is a physical weight, a dry and searing presence that tastes of ancient dust and sun-scorched salt. Every breath is a struggle against the invisible fire that hangs in the atmosphere, and the only music left to the travellers is the hypnotic, rhythmic crunch of thousands of sandals striking the sand in unison. It is a soft, shushing sound, a repetitive pulse that mirrors the beating of a tired heart. The sand itself is not merely a surface, but a living, moving ocean of gold, its texture changing from the fine, powdery silk of the dune crests to the coarse, gravelly grit of the valley floors. The wind, when it chooses to speak, does so in a low, mourning whistle that carries the scent of parched bones and the dry, metallic tang of the distant sun. The young king leads from the front, his eyes fixed on a horizon that refuses to remain still, shimmering and dancing in the heat haze like a beckoning ghost. He can feel the fine grit of the desert in his hair, behind his ears, and deep within, the folds of his linen tunic, a constant, irritating reminder of the earth's indifference to his ambition. The sun is a relentless, unblinking eye that turns the sky into a bowl of white fire, making the bronze of the armor too hot to touch and the water in the leather skins taste like warm, stagnant blood. Yet, in this state of extreme deprivation, a strange sort of trance begins to take hold. The repetition of the march, the endless rise and fall of the dunes, and the rhythmic sigh of the sand beneath his feet create a sanctuary of thought. The external world falls away, leaving only the sensation of movement and the internal whisper of destiny. The smell of the desert at midday is a clean, sterilized scent, devoid of life, but filled with a terrifying purity. As the days stretch into an eternity of gold, the prince feels himself being stripped bare, his royal titles and military triumphs falling away until he is nothing but a soul moving through a void, searching for a voice that has been calling to him since the beginning of time. Then, just as the spirit begins to falter, and the line between reality and mirage starts to blur, the scent of the world changes. It begins as a faint, almost impossible sweetness on the edge of the wind, a cool and humid vibration that carries the aroma of damp earth and living things. The soldiers stir, their heads lifting like hounds catching a scent, as the dry, metallic air is replaced by the fragrance of wild mint, lush clover, and the heavy, intoxicating perfume of the acacia trees. The horizon, once a jagged line of fire, is suddenly broken by a smudge of deep emerald green that seems to rise out of the sand like a miracle. This is the oasis of Siwa, a hidden jewel of life tucked away in the suffocating embrace of the wasteland. As they draw closer, the sound of the desert silence is broken by the delicate, crystalline music of running water. The springs of the oasis bubble up from the deep limestone vaults of the Ambience, earth, their sound a cooling liquid laughter that promises salvation. The transition from the burning heat to the deep velvet shade of the palm groves is a sensory shock, a sudden plunge into a world of shadow and moisture. The young king dismounts, his legs trembling slightly from the long days of the march, and he moves toward the nearest pool with the reverence of a pilgrim. The water is a brilliant, translucent turquoise, its surface undisturbed save for the occasional ripple of a rising bubble. He kneels at the edge, the mossy stones cool and slick beneath his palms, and he dips his hands into the liquid. The temperature is shockingly cold, a sharp and beautiful contrast to the fever of the desert. As he drinks, the taste of the fresh water is overwhelming, a mineral-rich sweetness that seems to flow directly into his veins, cooling his blood and clearing the fog from his mind. Beside the pools, the date palms lean heavy with fruit, their long serrated leaves rustling in the sun. Breeze with a sound like falling rain. He reaches up to pluck a cluster of dates, the skin of the fruit tacky and warm from the sun. The texture is soft and yielding, the flesh inside a dense sugary paste that tastes of honey and the deep rich secrets of the earth. In this sanctuary of green, the agony of the desert is forgotten, replaced by a profound sense of peace. The air is thick with the hum of dragonflies and the soft cooing of doves, a symphony of life that feels like a blessing from the gods themselves. But the true purpose of the journey lies beyond the shade of the palms, at the summit of the great rock of Achilles, where the temple of Ammon sits in weathered ancient majesty. The ascent to the sanctuary is a climb through layers of time, the stone steps worn smooth by the passage of countless centuries. The air here grows still and heavy once more, but it is a different kind of stillness than the desert's void. It is the expectant, charged silence of a holy place. Alexander enters the temple alone, leaving his companions and his guards at the threshold. The interior of the sanctuary is a realm of absolute darkness, save for the faint, flickering glow of a few oil lamps that cast long, distorted shadows against the hieroglyph-covered walls. The smell of the temple is a complex, layered aroma of old smoke, heavy incense made of myrrh and frankincense, and the cool, damp scent of the limestone foundations. The floor beneath his sandals is cold and uneven, a tactile map of the ancient rituals that have taken place within these walls since the dawn of the world. He moves deeper into the darkness, toward the inner sanctum where the oracle waits. The sound of his own footsteps is a loud, echoing intrusion in the silence, a reminder of his mortality in the presence of the divine. As he reaches the final chamber, he feels a presence in the shadows, a vibration in the air that suggests the god is near. The darkness is so thick it feels like a physical substance, a velvet shroud that presses against his skin and muffles his senses. From the depths of this shadow, a voice emerges. It is not a human voice, but a sound that seems to come from the stones themselves, a low, rasping whisper that carries the weight of 1,000 generations. The words are spoken in a language that is both foreign and intimately familiar, a silken thread of sound that weaves its way into the king's heart. The oracle does not address him as a king or a general, but as the son of Ammon, the child of the very sun that he has just spent weeks enduring. The whisper tells him of his true origin, of a father who sits upon the throne of the universe, and of a destiny that spans not just the lands of the earth, but the stars themselves. The silence that follows the oracle's words is the deepest the king has ever known. It is a silence that changes the texture of his own being, a moment of profound realization that alters the course of his life forever. He stands in the darkness, the scent of the incense and the cold stone filling his lungs, and he feels the weight of the crown of Macedonia being replaced by the weight of a divine inheritance. The air in the sanctuary seems to vibrate with the power of the revelation, a quiet, humming energy that travels through his body like a slow-moving fire. He realizes that the shadow of Achilles, which has followed him for so long, is now merged with the brilliance of the god. When he finally turns to leave the temple, he is no longer the man who entered. He walks back into the blinding light of the Egyptian sun with a new, terrifying clarity in his eyes. The desert, once a formidable enemy, now looks like his own garden, and the world beyond the horizon is merely a house that he has come to claim. The whisper of the oracle remains in his ears, a constant hypnotic companion that will guide him through the blood and the dust of the years to come, reminding him always that he is more than a man. He is a son of the light, destined to shine until the end of time. The arrival at the gates of Babylon is not a simple entry into a city, but a slow, staggering immersion into a dream made of lapis lazuli and gold. The heat of Mesopotamia hangs over the Euphrates like a shimmering veil, thick with the scent of river mud, baked bitumen, and the sweet, heavy aroma of date honey fermenting in the sun. As the young king approaches, the dust of the road begins to settle, and the horizon is suddenly dominated by a structure that defies the limits of human imagination. The Ishtar Gate rises from the earth like a solid block of the evening sky, its surface composed of thousands of glazed bricks of the deepest, most vibrant blue. The texture of the glaze is smooth and cool to the touch, reflecting the harsh sunlight in a way that makes the entire gateway appear to pulse with an inner, liquid light. Each brick is a masterpiece of precision, and as the king draws closer, the intricate figures of golden lions and dragons begin to emerge from the azure background. Their scales are rendered in raised relief, and the prince reaches out a hand to trace the curve of a lion's mane, finding the surface both slick and strangely warm from the day's heat. The sound of the city is a distant, low-frequency hum, a tapestry of thousands of voices, the clatter of carts and the rhythmic chanting of priests, all filtered through the massive arched throat of the gateway. The air within the passage is significantly cooler, smelling of damp stone and the sharp medicinal scent of cedar wood used for the great doors. As Alexander walks through the shadow of the arch, the scale of the architecture begins to weigh upon his spirit, a silent reminder that he has entered the heart of an empire that was ancient when Macedonia was still a collection of mountain villages. The blue of the walls is so intense it feels like being submerged in a deep, sunlit ocean, a sensory experience that is both hypnotic and overwhelming. The echoes of his sandals on the polished pavement are soft and hollow, swallowed by the sheer mass of the walls. He pauses for a moment in the center of the gate, closing his eyes to better feel the vibration of the city, the pulse of a civilization that has survived for millennia. The air is heavy with the history of the place, a dense atmosphere that clings to the skin like a silken robe, and in this moment the conqueror feels the first true stirrings of the burden of the East. The journey continues into the heart of the empire, eventually leading to the silent, majestic ruins of the palace at Persepolis. Within the private chambers of the fallen King Darius, the atmosphere is one of absolute, suffocating luxury. The night has fallen, and the vast halls are illuminated only by the soft amber glow of silver lamps that burn the rarest oils of India and the hills of Persia. The scent in the room is a complex, intoxicating blend of sandalwood, musk, and the heavy floral sweetness of crushed roses. It is an aroma that settles in the lungs like a physical weight, inviting a state of deep, dreamlike lethargy. The floor is covered in carpets so thick and soft that the king's footsteps make no sound at all, the wool feeling like a velvet cloud beneath his feet. He moves toward the great bed of the great king, where the hangings are made of the finest Tyrian silk, dyed in a purple so dark it appears almost black in the lamplight. The texture of the silk is miraculously smooth, sliding through his fingers like water, a cool and shimmering surface that seems to hold the very essence of the empire's wealth. He sits on the edge of the low couch, his fingers brushing against the intricate gold embroidery that depicts the celestial spheres and the trees of life. The silence of the palace is profound, a heavy velvet quiet that is broken only by the occasional soft pop of a lamp wick or the distant morning sigh of the wind as it winds its way through the forest of colossal stone pillars. He can feel the ghosts of the Persians in the corners of the room, the lingering presence of a dynasty that believed itself to be eternal. The air is cool and tastes of ancient dust and the sweet smoke of the incense, a combination that induces a sense of profound, reflective melancholy. In this sanctuary of gold and silk, the prince contemplates the nature of power, the way it can be as soft as the fabric in his hands and as fragile as the glass of the lamps. He looks at the shadows dancing on the high, painted ceiling, seeing the shapes of his own future and the ruins of his past. The luxury is not a comfort, but a challenge, a seductive force that threatens to soften the edge of his resolve, and he breathes in the heavy, perfumed air, letting it steady his heart for the trials that still lie ahead. Near the centre of the chamber, illuminated by the cold, silvery light of a full moon that pours through a high, circular skylight, lies a table of polished ebony. Upon it is spread a vast map of the known world, rendered on a piece of vellum so large it covers the entire surface. The parchment is thick and heavy, its edges curled and yellowed with age, and it smells of dry ink, linseed oil, and the sharp, acidic tang of the tanner's shop. Alexander moves toward the table, the moonlight catching the silver thread of the rivers and the dark charcoal lines of the mountain ranges. He reaches out to touch the surface of the map, his fingertips grazing the rough, uneven texture of the ink. The world, as seen from this perspective, is a series of interconnected lines and spaces, a puzzle that he has spent his entire life trying to solve. He traces the path of his own march, from the rugged mountains of Macedonia, across the blue thread of the Hellespont, and into the vast, sprawling heart of Asia. The map feels like a living thing beneath his hand, a tactile representation of the earth's own skin. He looks toward the sore edges of the vellum, where the lines grow thin and the names of cities and rivers fade into the blank, unwritten spaces of the unknown. He wonders how far a man can go before he reaches the end of the world, before the earth simply falls away into the celestial sea. The air in the room has grown colder now, the scent of the evening air from the gardens mixing with the heavy perfume of the palace. He can hear the soft, rhythmic rustle of the palm trees outside, a sound that reminds him of the waves hitting the shore at Troy. The moonlight makes the map appear to glow with its own internal fire, the silver ink shimmering like liquid metal. He thinks of the mountains of the east, the jagged peaks of the Hindu Kush that are said to touch the very throne of the gods, and the vast, mysterious plains of India that lie beyond them. The scale of the world is terrifying and beautiful, an endless expanse of dust and glory that is waiting for his footprint. He stands there in the silence of the moonlit palace, his heart beating with a quiet, unyielding rhythm, as he realizes that the map is not a record of what has been found, but a promise of what is yet to be taken. The world is a vast, silent sanctuary, and he is the only one who has the key to its final hidden door. As the moon begins to set and the first pale light of the pre-dawn sky begins to touch the horizon, the king remains at the table, his eyes fixed on the distant edges of the parchment. The silence of the room has become a companion, a space of pure thought and ambition where the voices of the past and the demands of the future are finally stilled. He can feel the weight of the history he is making, a heavy, golden presence that settles around his shoulders like the royal mantle of the Persians. The smell of the cooling oil in the lamps is sharp and clean, a reminder that the night is ending and the time for action is near. He realizes that to be a king is to be a cartographer of the soul, mapping the limits of human endurance and the boundaries of the possible. He closes his eyes for a moment, letting the texture of the vellum and the scent of the palace settle into his memory, a snapshot of the moment when he held the entire world in the palm of his hand. The ascent into the jagged, ice-crowned peaks of the Hindu Kush is a journey that strips away the vanity of kings and replaces it with the raw, primal struggle for breath. As the army winds its way upward along the narrow, treacherous paths of the Parapamisade, the air begins to change, losing the heavy, warm scents of the Persian plains and becoming a thin, crystalline ether that tastes of nothing but pure, biting cold and ancient stone. Every inhalation is a sharp, icy needle that pricks at the back of the throat, and the lungs must work twice as hard to pull the meagre spirit from the rarefied atmosphere. The world here is a monochromatic theatre of white and grey, where the only colour is the deep, bruised violet of the sky above and the pale, shimmering blue of the glaciers that hang like frozen waterfalls from the mountain flanks. The sound of the march has been transformed, the rhythmic clatter of the Mediterranean replaced by the muffled, rhythmic crunch of sandals and hooves pressing into the deep, powdery snow. It is a quiet, rhythmic music, a soft and persistent shushing sound that is frequently drowned out by the sudden, violent roar of the wind as it whistles through the narrow granite passes. This wind is a predatory thing, a cold and invisible force that carries the fine, stinging dust of ice and the lonely, hollow scent of the upper world. The young king walks among his men, his cloak a heavy, frost-bitten weight upon his shoulders, the wool stiff with the frozen breath of 1,000 exhales. He can feel the numbness creeping into his fingertips and the bridge of his nose, a dull and persistent ache that reminds him of his own fragile mortality. The texture of the path beneath him is deceptive, a layer of soft, white velvet hiding the slick and unyielding ice that waits to betray a careless step. As they reach the highest points of the crossing, the silence becomes profound, a heavy and absolute stillness that feels as though the world itself has ceased to breathe. There is no scent of earth or life here, only the sterile, metallic smell of ozone and the dry, biting aroma of the snow. The men move like ghosts through a landscape of clouds, their faces wrapped in linen to protect against the frost, their eyes fixed on the heels of the man in front of them. In this high, white sanctuary, the ambitions of the past feel distant and small, swallowed by the immense and indifferent majesty of the peaks. The king looks out over the jagged horizon, seeing the world as the gods must see it, a vast and silent expanse of ice and light, and he feels a strange, cold peace settle over his heart, a realization that he has crossed the final barrier between the known and the Sterdekar. Eternal. The descent from the freezing heights of the mountains into the plains of India is a sensory shock that feels like being plunged into a boiling green sea. As the slopes fall away, the dry, sterile cold is suddenly replaced by a heavy, humid heat that wraps around the body like a wet silk robe. The air is no longer thin and sharp, but thick and sweet, carrying the overwhelming perfume of crushed jasmine, wild orchids, and the damp, earthy scent of rotting vegetation. It is a world of vibrant, aggressive colour, where the deep emerald of the jungle canopy is broken only by the brilliant flashes of exotic birds and the dark, shimmering ribbons of the great rivers. The sound of the silence in the mountains is replaced by a deafening, rhythmic symphony of life, the constant vibrating hum of millions of insects, the distant mournful cry of monkeys in the high branches, and the low resonant thrum of the earth itself. The moisture is so pervasive that the skin is never truly dry, a fine sheen of sweat and dew coating every surface, making the bronze of the armour feel slippery and the leather straps of the sandals grow soft and supple. Then the monsoon arrives, not as a gentle rain, but as a violent celestial breaking of the heavens. The first scent of the storm is a sharp electric tang of ozone that cuts through the sweet, heavy air of the jungle. Then comes the sound, a low and ominous rumble that vibrates in the chest, followed by the deafening roar of the water as it hits the broad, waxy leaves of the forest. The rain is a physical weight, a warm and torrential downpour that turns the world into a blur of grey and green. It smells of wet stone, fresh mud, and the deep, dark secrets of the soil, a scent that is both primal and rejuvenating. The soldiers stand in the deluge, their tunics soaked through in seconds, the water streaming off their helmets in silver curtains. The texture of the ground changes instantly, the dry dust of the paths turning into a bung. Thick, red clay that clings to the feet and the wheels of the carts with a stubborn, heavy grip. The jungle seems to grow even as they watch, the plants drinking in the sky with a frantic, rhythmic intensity. In this state of constant warm wetness, the boundaries of the self begin to dissolve, the king and his army becoming a part of the restless, breathing pulse of the Indian landscape. As the army reaches the banks of the Hydaspes River, the world settles into a tense, expectant quiet. The river is a massive, swollen entity, a dark and churning muscle of water that has been fed by the monsoon rains until it overflows its banks with a low, predatory hiss. The sound of the river is a constant rhythmic roar, a deep and hollow vibration that echoes through the camp like the breathing of a great beast. The smell of the water is heavy and silty, carrying the scent of the mountains they have left behind and the unknown lands that lie across the current. On the far shore, the watchfires of King Porus flicker like orange stars in the darkness, their light reflecting in the turbulent surface of the water in broken, shimmering streaks. The air in the Macedonian camp is cool and damp, smelling of wood smoke from the small, flickering cooking fires and the metallic tang of wet leather and sharpened steel. The men speak in low, hushed tones, their whispers swallowed by the sound of the rushing water, a collective shiver of anticipation that moves through the ranks like a ghost. Alexander sits alone near the water's edge, his fingers tracing the rough, wet bark of an ancient tree that leans out over the current. The wood is cold and slick beneath his touch, a solid anchor in a world of moving water and shifting shadows. He can feel the power of the river vibrating through the roots, a reminder of the raw, untamed forces that he has come to conquer. The silence of the camp behind him is a sanctuary of focus, a place where the weight of the coming battle is balanced by the profound, hypnotic rhythm of the river. He thinks of the elephants that wait in the darkness on the other side, their trumpeting cries occasionally cutting through the roar of the water with a sound like a bronze trumpet. The smell of the evening is complex, a mixture of the sweet, damp jungle and the sharp, acrid scent of the torches that line the perimeter of the camp. In this moment, on the edge of the world, the king feels a supreme and quiet clarity. The river is not a barrier, but a bridge, a final test of his will and his divinity. The sound of the water fills his mind, drowning out the voices of doubt and the echoes of the past, leaving only the steady, rhythmic pulse of his own heart. He closes his eyes and breathes in the cool, silty air, letting the roar of the Hydaspes become the melody of his destiny, a song of water and blood that will carry him into the final, golden light of his legend. The rain does not fall in the valley of the Hydaspes as a mere storm, but as a heavy, eternal weight that seeks to dissolve the very foundations of the earth. It is a relentless, rhythmic drumming that strikes the bronze shields of the exhausted army with a metallic, sonorous persistence, creating a world of liquid silver and deep red mud. In the aftermath of the great clash, the air is thick with the copper tang of blood, the pungent, musky scent of wet elephants, and the overwhelming aroma of churned earth and crushed tropical greenery. The young king stands in the centre of the deluge, his cloak a sodden, heavy mantle that clings to his frame like a second skin. Before him, the defeated King Porus remains atop his massive war elephant, a figure carved from the very spirit of the Indian soil. The silence between them is profound, a sanctuary of mutual respect that exists in the heart of the torrential downpour. Alexander watches as the giant of a man descends with a slow, pained dignity, his skin the colour of dark teak, and his eyes filled with a fierce, unyielding light. The sound of the rain on the king's helmet is a steady, hypnotic pulse, a reminder of the thousands of lives that have been poured out into this mud. As they finally stand face to face, the difference in their scale is striking, yet their spirits occupy the same heights. The air between them is electric, vibrating with the shared knowledge of what it means to lead, to fight, and to fall. The smell of the rain-washed earth is sweet and primal, a scent that speaks of new beginnings even in the shadow of death. Alexander reaches out, his hand brushing against the rough, wet texture of the other king's arm, and he feels the heat of the warrior's life still burning bright despite the wounds. He whispers his question into the sound of the falling water, his voice a low, melodic vibration that carries no malice, only a deep and searching curiosity. "How do you wish to be treated?" he asks, and the response from Porus is a sound that seems to rise from the very depths of the riverbed. As a king, the Indian ruler replies, and the simplicity of the words settles over the field like a benediction. In that moment, the rain seems to soften, its roar turning into a gentle, shushing sigh as the two warriors find a peace that the world of men rarely allows. The texture of the moment is one of cold water and warm blood, of steel and soul, a meeting of two storms that have finally found their centre. When the time comes to leave the blood-soaked banks of the Hydaspes, the army begins its slow, rhythmic descent down the Indus toward the great unknown ocean. They travel upon a fleet of vessels built from the dark, aromatic woods of the Indian forests, the hulls creaking with a comforting, repetitive music as they cut through the brown, silt-heavy waters. The air on the river is a thick, syrupy mixture of humidity and the intoxicating scent of the banks, where the jungle grows so close to the water that the long, waxy leaves of the palms brush against the sides of the ships. The sound of the oars is a rhythmic, splashing heartbeat, a liquid melody that accompanies the exotic calls of birds hidden deep within the emerald canopy. The king sits at the prow of his galley, his eyes tracing the shifting textures of the shoreline, where the mud is baked into intricate, cracking patterns by the relentless sun, and the roots of the banyan trees twist into the water like the limbs of ancient sleeping gods. The smell of the river is complex, a blend of fresh water, decaying lilies, and the sharp, spicy aroma of wood smoke drifting from hidden villages. The journey is a slow-motion kaleidoscope of wonders. They see the long, prehistoric shapes of crocodiles basking on the sandbars, their scales like rough grey stone, and the brilliant, flickering light of dragonflies that dance above the surface of the water like living gems. The soldiers, weary from years of march and battle, find a strange, melancholic comfort in the movement of the river. They play soft, haunting melodies on their flutes, the notes drifting across the water to be swallowed by the vast green silence of the jungle. The air is so heavy with moisture that it feels as though they are breathing the river itself, a cool and saturating mist that settles into the pores and calms the restless spirit. Alexander watches the sun set over the wide expanse of the Indus, the water turning into a sheet of liquid gold and violet, and he feels the pull of the ocean, the final boundary of the world. But even as the beauty of the landscape fills his senses, There is a growing weight in the atmosphere, a quiet, insistent tension that speaks of the limits of human endurance. The river carries them forward, a silver thread winding through a world of shadow and light, but the hearts of the men are beginning to look backward, toward the mountains they have crossed and the homes they have almost forgotten. The arrival at the Hyphasis River marks the end of the dream, a place where the forward momentum of the world's greatest conqueror finally meets the unyielding wall of his own people's exhaustion. The rain has returned, a constant grey drizzle that turns the camp into a landscape of sodden wool and dripping leather. The air is thick with the scent of damp earth, old bandages, and the sharp, metallic smell of wood smoke that refuses to rise in the heavy atmosphere. The sound of the camp is no longer the clatter of preparation, but a low morning murmur, the collective sigh of an army that has reached its breaking point. Alexander remains in his tent, the silence inside a heavy, suffocating presence that is broken only by the rhythmic patter of the rain against the canvas. The texture of the air is cold and damp, a weight that settles on his chest as he contemplates the letters from home, the parchment soft and limp from the moisture, the ink beginning to blur into the grey fibres. He can hear the soft, muffled sobs of the men outside, the sound of veterans who have faced the terrors of the East but cannot face another mile of the unknown. The decision to turn back is not a defeat of the sword, but a surrender to the soul. When the king finally emerges from his tent, his face is a mask of profound, quiet melancholy, his eyes reflecting the grey light of the rainy afternoon. He speaks to his men, not with the fire of the conqueror, but with the tenderness of a father who recognizes the pain of his children. The air in the camp seems to hold its breath as he announces the return, and the silence that follows is the most powerful sound he has ever heard. It is a silence filled with relief, with sorrow, and with a deep, aching longing for the fields of Macedonia and the familiar scents of the Mediterranean. The smell of the camp changes in an instant, the bitterness of exhaustion replaced by the sweet nostalgic aroma of hope. The men begin to break down their tents, their movements slow and reverent, as if they are handling the relics of a conqueror, holy journey. The rain continues to fall, a soft and persistent veil that blurs the edges of the world, but it no longer feels like a burden. It is a baptism, a washing away of the blood and the dust of the long march. As the army prepares to turn its back on the horizon, Alexander stands one last time by the edge of the river. The water is a dark, rushing mirror of his own restless heart, a force that will continue to flow toward the ocean long after he is gone. He reaches down to pick up a handful of the red Indian soil, the texture gritty and cold in his palm, and he lets it slip through his fingers, watching as it is reclaimed by the rain and the earth. The smell of the cooling air is sharp with the scent of pine and wet stone, a reminder of the mountains that wait for them on the long road home. The king feels a profound sense of loss, a mourning for the worlds he will never see, and the mysteries he will never unravel. But beneath the sorrow, there is a new and quiet strength. He has reached the edge of the known world, and in doing so, he has found the limits of his own divinity. The journey back will be a slow, heavy twilight, a march through the shadows of the past, but the memory of the rain and the river will remain in his soul like a golden liquid light. He turns away from the east, his footsteps heavy and rhythmic in the mud, as the Rain King begins the long, whispered walk toward the end of his own legend. The return to Babylon is not the thunderous entrance of a conqueror, but the quiet, heavy homecoming of a spirit that has seen the edges of the world and found them wanting. As the great blue gates of Ishtar swallow the procession once more, the air is no longer the sharp, electric atmosphere of a new beginning, but a thick and syrupy mixture of river heat and ancient settling dust. The young king, his body a map of 1,000 scars and the invisible weight of countless miles, seeks the only sanctuary that can offer a reprieve from the burning intensity of the sun. He is carried upward, away from the clatter of the streets and the endless petitions of the court, into the heart of the hanging gardens. Here the world changes. The air is suddenly 15 degrees cooler, a moist and velvet breath that smells of crushed lilies, damp moss, and the sweet resinous sap of the cedar trees. The sound of the city below is reduced to a distant rhythmic hum, a vibration that feels like the breathing of a sleeping giant. Within this vertical forest, the silence is curated by the constant, musical trickle of water being raised by the great creaking pulleys and sent cascading down tiered stone channels. Each drop of water creates a tiny crystalline note that dances through the heavy shade, inviting the mind to let go of the sword and the spear. Alexander rests upon a couch of cedar and ivory, the wood smelling of deep forests and the salt of the sea. The texture of the silk cushions beneath him is cool and liquid, a shimmering surface that provides a gentle contrast to the dry, fevered heat that has begun to take root in his bones. He reaches out to touch a fern that grows from a crack in the limestone wall, the fronds soft and feathery, still beaded with the artificial rain of the garden. The moisture on his fingertips is a small, beautiful mercy. He breathes in the scent of the evening, a combination of wet stone and the intoxicating perfume of the night-blooming jasmine that clings to the pillars. In this green sanctuary, the king is no longer the son of Ammon or the lord of Asia. He is simply a man who is very, very tired. The light here is filtered through a canopy of exotic leaves, creating a mosaic of emerald and gold that shifts with the gentle movement of the breeze. The sound of the water is a hypnotic lullaby, a repetitive and ancient song that tells him the world will continue to turn whether he leads it or not. The heavy warm scent of the Babylonian night begins to wrap around him, a protective cocoon that shields him from the demands of his empire. As the days stretch into a slow and hazy progression, the king spends his final hours upon the highest terrace, looking out over the vast, shimmering expanse of the Euphrates. The river is a silver ribbon that cuts through the desert, its surface reflecting the changing moods of the sky with a silent and unyielding grace. From this height, the water looks like a living muscle, a force of nature that has witnessed the rise and fall of 1,000 kings before him. The air on the terrace is thin and carries the scent of the river mud, the pungent aroma of the reeds, and the sharp metallic tang of the sun-baked brick of the city walls. Alexander watches the slow movement of the reed boats far below, their oars making tiny rhythmic ripples that are quickly swallowed by the current. The sound of the river is a constant low-frequency roar, a deep and hollow vibration that seems to match the pulse of his own blood. He can feel the fever, rising and falling like the tide, a dry and internal fire that turns the cool stone of the balustrade into a precious, frigid treasure beneath his palms. He thinks of the Indus, the Hydaspes, and the Nile, realizing that all the waters of the world are connected, a single, flowing thread of history that binds the East to the West. The scent of the damp plants in the garden below rises to meet him, a lush and humid fragrance that speaks of life and growth, even as he feels the slow, steady ebbing of his own strength. The texture of the air is thick and expectant, a heavy stillness that suggests the world is holding its breath. He traces the lines of a map in his mind, but the borders no longer seem important. The only thing that remains is the sensation of the wind against his face, a soft and cooling touch that smells of the distant mountains and the open sea. He watches a single leaf fall from a nearby plane tree, its movement a slow and graceful spiral that ends in the dark water of the garden pool. The sound of its impact is a tiny, delicate splash, a final note in the symphony of his life. The sun begins to dip below the horizon, casting long amber shadows across the terrace, and the king feels a profound sense of unity with the landscape. He is the river, he is the stone, and he is the scent of the jasmine in the air. The final transition comes not as a struggle, but as a gentle, rhythmic surrendering to the shadows. The royal apartments are filled with the soft, flickering light of 100 oil lamps, their flames dancing in the slight draught from the balcony. The smell of the room is a complex and comforting blend of lavender, dried herbs, and the sweet, heavy smoke of the incense that has been burning for days. His companions, the men who have followed him from the mountains of Macedonia to the banks of the Indus, stand in the shadows, their presence a silent and protective circle. The only sound is the soft, laboured breathing of the king and the distant, morning cry of an owl in the gardens. Alexander lies upon the great bed, the silk sheets feeling like a cool, shimmering cloud against his skin. He can feel the warmth of the sun fading from the walls of the palace, replaced by the deep and velvet chill of the night. The scent of the evening air, carried on a gentle breeze from the Euphrates, fills his lungs one last time, a clean and watery fragrance that smells of the beginning and the end. He looks toward the window, where the last sliver of the sun is vanishing into the golden haze of the desert. The sky is a tapestry of violet, indigo, and the palest of pinks, a celestial reflection of the empires he has built and the dreams he has pursued. As the light fades, he feels the weight of the world finally lifting from his chest, replaced by a lightness that he has not known since the days in the armory at Pella. The silence of the room becomes absolute, a sanctuary of peace where the voices of the past and the echoes of battle are finally silenced. He closes his eyes, and the darkness is not a void, but a warm and welcoming embrace, a place where the shadow of Achilles and the brilliance of Ammon merge into a single eternal light. The scent of the garden, the sound of the river, and the touch of the silk all fade into a single whispered memory. The king of the world is no longer a man of flesh and blood, but a story told in the rustle of the leaves and the flow of the water. He drifts into a deep and restorative sleep, his heart finding its final quiet rhythm in the heart of Babylon as the stars begin to emerge in the velvet sky, watching over the silent sanctuary of his legacy. The dust of the great king's path has finally settled, and we gently, quietly close this ancient book. The empires of the past are far away now, and the only world that remains is this room, this warmth, and the rhythm of your breath. You have nothing left to do tonight, no more worlds to conquer. You are safe, you are held, and you are home. If you find peace within these walls, perhaps you will choose to stay with us by subscribing to our quiet circle and returning to your chair by the fire tomorrow night. But for now, let the embers fade, drift into the darkness. Sleep, sleep, good night.